Good morning, friend. Welcome back to my kitchen. My name is Becky if you're new, and today is a big processing day. I have a fresh pot of coffee. I have a full cup of water here. We have the kitchen clean and basically put together, ready to process half of this year's tomatoes. So we've got Roma tomatoes here, cherry tomatoes here, and 2 folding tables full of tomatoes. This is a huge project we are about to tackle, and we've got 2 main products I want to get out of these tomatoes this year. So I'm going to start this top oven at 415 degrees. I actually cleaned out this bottom oven. I usually use this as pots and pan storage, but we need this oven. It's actually the first time I've ever used this bottom oven here. And I'm going to preheat this oven to 415 degrees as well. I am coming over here. We have a ton of clean jars. I washed these yesterday and I put them as they came out of the dishwasher. It took me 2 loads to get these done on these towels, open side down, so they're nice and clean and ready for me. We have a water bath canner out. We have my 30-quart pot out that we are gonna use and hopefully fill this thing up with marinara sauce. We are gonna make a roasted marinara sauce out of one of my favorite canning cookbooks. Many of you have this and have asked me, which is the marinara sauce that you keep raving about? It is in the All New Ball Canning and Preserving book. It is on page 204, and it is the oven roasted marinara sauce. One recipe calls for 20 pounds of tomatoes. I wanna turn almost all of those, except for a few of them, into this roasted marinara sauce. So we first have to weigh how many tomatoes we have to see how many recipes worth we can get out of the tomatoes that I so far have harvested from the garden. Now the other project we're gonna be doing today, we're gonna use all the ovens, is we are gonna make out of my friend Crystal's book, Freeze Fresh, oven, in quotes, sun-dried tomatoes. And so this, we need the oven set at 400. I think I didn't set one of my ovens yet, so I'll do that. We are gonna make these kind of sun-dried tomato-like tomatoes with a lot of these cherry tomatoes, plus I'm gonna use some of these really small Roma tomatoes. Her recipe actually calls for a paste style tomato or cherry tomatoes, but she does recommend a Roma style tomato. I have only a few, just this little handful here of these small Romas that I don't think are gonna be worth putting into my marinara sauce. So we're gonna do an experiment using those versus using the abundance of these cherry tomatoes. I have a lot more out in the garden where this came from. So this oven here, I'm gonna go ahead and preheat to 400 degrees. I will link both of these books down in the description box along with all this canning equipment if you are interested in attempting to make your own marinara sauce. And I used to, back in the day, I have been doing canning tomatoes for going on 8 years or so. And well before I had my own garden, I started canning my own tomatoes. I would buy tomatoes from a local farmer. And I used to can my tomatoes just in plain sauce so that I could do anything I wanted with them. But I found this marinara sauce, I'm gonna turn the light on, and it's so good. I went through it so quickly last year. I want to make more of it, and I want to, getting my scale out, hopefully make a year's worth. I did not make a year's worth last year. I am finding that I actually like canning the marinara sauce because I can pop the jar open, boil some noodles, cook up some meat if I want to, and dinner is done. Now, if I don't want to cook the meat and just have marinara sauce and noodles, I can do that too. But it is so good, we're gonna be making a lot of it today. But I need to measure out my tomatoes first so I can get a sense of how many tomatoes I have, so I can figure out how many times I need to double or triple or quadruple this recipe. When canning, you need to follow the directions pretty exactly because canning is a science, it is not an art form. So here we go. I'm gonna weigh out this bowl of tomatoes first. This scale only goes to 11 pounds, so we are over 11 pounds. That right there is 11 pounds. Let's do 10 at a time so that I don't have to do hard math in my head. So we're gonna weigh out 10 pounds at a time. This isn't even all the tomatoes tomatoes. I have a ton of tomatoes in my refrigerator. I know you're not supposed to put tomatoes in the fridge, but either they were gonna go bad or I needed to freeze them, and I'd rather just throw them in the fridge. And we're gonna turn them into sauce, so if the texture of them changes a little bit, that's okay. So here is 10 pounds of tomatoes. We're gonna weigh out another 10 pounds, and that's gonna give us 1 recipe's worth. I also do have tomatoes in my freezer that we're gonna pull out as well. My goal today is to tackle all of these tomatoes. I was feeling very overwhelmed this morning, so I don't even have jeans on. I couldn't eventually put jeans on. I've got some nice comfy leggings on, I've got slippers on, and we're just gonna spend all day in the kitchen until we get all of these tomatoes processed. Now, the majority of the tomatoes going into the sauce are gonna be Roma tomatoes because that does make the best style of marinara sauce, but I do have some heirlooms that we will be adding, and the recipe says you can do that. We're just gonna need to cook them down a little bit longer. All these tomatoes do need to be washed as well, but I figured I would go ahead and just weigh them first, figure out how many recipes we're gonna be making, and then we will weigh them in a bit, or wash them in a bit. One reason I need to know how many recipes we're making because I need to chop up tomatoes and garlic, and I don't know how many, not tomatoes, I need to chop up onions, and I need to know how many onions I need to chop. If there are a couple in here that aren't totally ripe yet, I will set those aside and I will let these ripen. I've got a couple other canning projects I want to do, and so I am going to use the rest of the tomatoes that are out in the garden, and we will turn the tomatoes that are not quite ripe yet into those other projects that I want to do this year. Okay. Okay, 10 pounds right there. So this right here is 20 pounds. So this is 1 recipe's worth of marinara sauce for me. Let's go fill this up again. This is 10 pounds here. So I'm gonna use this bowl next to weigh out my next 10 pounds. So I need to get this on the scale and tare it. That is another 10 pounds. So far I have 10 pounds, 20 and 20. So that's 3 recipes worth. I have 9 pounds here, and these tomatoes, I want to ripen a little bit more, and we'll do a project with them next week. These I'm gonna turn into the sun-dried tomatoes. Those ones need to go to the chickens. That one we're gonna eat fresh for dinner tonight. So I need a few more pounds of potatoes. Have I been saying potatoes this whole time? Tomatoes. So I think what I'm gonna do is just run to the garden and see if I can find any ripe ones. I'm sure I can. I'm just gonna pick all the ripe ones I can find. If I can find another 10 pounds and do another half recipe, then that's what we're gonna do. Okay, I see some ripe ones in here. This is good. It didn't rain last night, so everything's a little wet. These ones, I don't know if these are gonna be good. Yeah, those look good. Right now I'm just gonna harvest the ripe ones that I will use in recipes. Some of these need a little bit longer, and I will maybe harvest them over the weekend or something, I'm not sure. Oh yeah, look at these. This is so frustrating. This is why I've been letting them ripen inside, because slug damage is so frustrating. If I wasn't on a mission right now to jar up a bunch of these tomatoes, I would harvest all the ones that are partially ripe, but I need to focus on the task at hand, and then maybe tonight, if I feel up to it, I'll come out and get any of the tomatoes that are blushing Oh yeah, I have lots of tomatoes out here that I can harvest that are perfectly ripe and ready to go. And this is actually good because it rained last night. So this one has a crack in it. So that one's gonna go bad if I don't do anything with it anyway. Any of these cracked ones, I'm gonna go ahead and just process today. It's so funny. I was stressed about my tomato harvest this year because it is mid-September and I just started harvesting big bulk quantities of tomatoes within the last week. I mean, we've been eating cherry tomatoes for a long time now, but actually slicing tomatoes and Roma tomatoes. And so I was worried that we weren't gonna get any, and now we are inundated. And I planted about half the amount of tomatoes I planted last year, and I feel like I'm getting just as many tomatoes. I think we got at least another 10 pounds, maybe 15 pounds of tomatoes in here. Again, none of these tomatoes have been washed, so we'll wash them all at one time. So there's 10 pounds here. So we have 1, 2, 3 and a half. So now we can see how many we just harvested. There's another 20. I'm okay if I'm kind of jostling them a little bit more than necessary because they're going to be turned into sauce in just a minute. So I'm not worried about bruising or anything like that. So this is 1 pound. Now I just pulled out of the freezer these tomatoes that as they were ripe and ready to go, I washed them, cut the tops off, cut them in half and froze them flat, but I did not weigh them first. So I have another cookie sheet that is that same weight. So I'm gonna weigh this so I know what the weight of the cookie sheet is. Then I can tear that and then I can get the proper weight for those tomatoes. These weigh 4 pounds, so we have 5 pounds total between this and that. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 and a quarter recipe worth of tomatoes to make 4 1/4 batches of roasted tomato marinara sauce. And it's gonna be really delicious. We're gonna get the benefits of the paste tomatoes, the thick meatiness of them, and the flavor and complexity from the Roma tomatoes, I think combined is gonna create a beautiful sauce. So I can actually get these in the oven first. I'm going to go ahead and go like this. And I wanna just wash these tomatoes and get them roasting so that we can start this process, because this is going to be quite the process. And there's still lots of tomatoes out there so that I can do the other 2 tomato projects I want to do this year. What I think I should do is actually write down how many tomatoes I have weighed out so that I make sure I keep my numbers correct. So I said earlier we have 4 1/4 batches worth of homegrown tomatoes. Now something I'm really proud of is that all the ingredients other than the wine going into this recipe are 100% homegrown. And I started all these veggies from seed myself, which is something I've been working towards for years. But you don't need to grow your own tomatoes in order to put up your own tomatoes if you don't want to. And now is the perfect time to go run to your local farm, farmers market, Google some local U-picks, and see if you can find some locally grown tomatoes in your area. I can't remember now, it was either jam or tomatoes that were the first things I canned, and it did take me a few years to figure out how we like them the best. I have definitely found that this recipe is fantastic, and we like them when I take the time to remove the skins and the seeds. It just makes for a better product, and my philosophy now about canning and putting up things is that if I am going to go through the effort of trying to grow it, source it locally, put it up for us to enjoy, I want it to taste incredible. I want to be excited about going and getting it off my pantry shelf. And so that's why I have learned it's worth taking the extra time up front so that when it comes to using it throughout the winter, I'm glad that I took that time to make the most delicious thing I possibly could. So I know that all these tomatoes on my counter are the amount of weight that I need. So I don't mind if I start mixing them up a little bit, but when it comes to roasting them, I am going to try to roast them with like things. So the Roma tomatoes I'll roast together, which I already now have in the oven. The heirlooms I will roast together in the oven just so that they cook up at about the same rate. And I am washing them. I am going to take the time to wash each individual tomato just because I want to make sure it is as clean as possible. And I'm only going to wash a few of these now, and I'm going to get these prepped and ready to go in the oven so that my ovens can be working for me while I wash and prep the rest of them. I'm going to put my washed tomatoes over here and my non-washed tomatoes over here. We're still going to have to wash all those cherry tomatoes, but we'll get to that in a bit. So there are some tomatoes there. I'm gonna go ahead and grab a knife. I think I'm gonna go ahead and sharpen this because I haven't sharpened it in a while. Or hone, I think this is called a honer. So I'm gonna hone my knife. I need to take all my knives to the professional knife sharpener. When I was at the farmer's market the other day, I realized that the guy that I took my knives to, or Josh took my knives to, I should say, for my birthday a few years ago, he's at our farmer's market every Sunday. So maybe this weekend. I don't think I have anything going on this weekend. I will take my knives to the knife sharpener. Sunday, I am going to our local art museum with a friend. So can't do it Sunday, maybe next week. So this morning, I think I mentioned I was getting a little overwhelmed about this project. I'm gonna grab a couple pairs of gloves here because my hands are going to probably not like being in the acidity of these tomatoes for the amount of time they're going to be. So I'm gonna put some gloves on. And my cutting board needs to be oiled. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of avocado oil on here just to protect it. But I kept telling myself today, all I have to focus on is these tomatoes. So that kind of helped reduce my overwhelm. And I really enjoy doing these types of things. So just reminding myself that it's okay to be overwhelmed and it's okay to just kind of buckle up and put in the work it's gonna take to get this done. I will be so grateful. I think a little bit, because Josh was like, why are you feeling so overwhelmed? And I was like, it might be because I'm worried that I'm gonna mess these tomatoes up. I liked the marinara sauce so much last year that I feel a lot of pressure on myself that I want it to turn out as good this year as it did last year, but I think it's gonna be delicious. So we're just gonna take our time and work on making the best product possible to put on the pantry shelf that we will be so incredibly excited to eat all fall, winter, and hopefully into next summer. Because we don't really start harvesting tomatoes until late. Now, one of you gifted me this, and I've been waiting an entire year to use it because I got it after my tomatoes were ripe and I was done processing tomatoes, and it's a tomato corer. Let me just tell you, that's the first time I've used it. That works amazing. Oh, and my knife is nice and sharp now. That is incredible. Thank you. That is awesome. I have been saving this for an entire year to use. Okay, so I'm gonna cut this, I think, in half, and definitely sharpen your knives. I have my roaster pan out. I'm gonna use all my roasters today. I need to get a compost bowl. I also want to work on de-seeding these as well. I did this last year and it worked great. So you just kind of squeeze out any of the excess seeds. The Romas, I don't think I'm gonna have to run through the food mill, but these heirlooms, I think I'm going to have to. But just to kind of start by getting some of the seeds out, I'm gonna squeeze them. Well, that's why I have an apron on. I want to get all of my ovens working for me before I start dicing up the onions. I also want to get the onions going for me because those need to caramelize. Now the recipe does say to caramelize the onions in the oven, but I am going to be using the oven for all these tomatoes, so I'm going to go ahead and just caramelize them on the stovetop, and that'll be just fine. And I kind of want to get my ovens working for me since I have them on before I manage the onions. I really like these big orange tomatoes. These are Old German, I think, or pineapple. I don't remember which one exactly, but they're so meaty and delicious. You get a lot of meat on them for an heirloom. They're actually my favorite tomato to slice and put onto BLTs and things like that, which we've kind of been living off of. I put these heirlooms in this tall roaster sided pan because I figured they were going to release more moisture than my paste tomatoes. So I have 2 more cookie sheets I can fill up, and then we'll probably, I don't know, we'll just keep working. This is a marathon of a day, and we do get it all done. It does take all day. It is a labor of love, and it is something that I have been doing. I've been canning tomatoes now for 9 years. I was looking back at my photos, and tomatoes were, yes, the very first thing I ever canned. When Josh and I first got married, I went down a rabbit hole of reading all sorts of books, and I found YouTube at the time and learning about our food system and all these sorts of things. And I thought, I want to try to learn to can tomatoes when we were first married. And so my mom, for my birthday, actually bought me my ball book, the one that I talk about and use all the time. She bought me 2 cases of jars, and I went to my local farm and I bought tomatoes from him and I canned them. And it has been a journey to learn my favorite way to can tomatoes. And I feel like last year I finally found my absolute favorite way to can tomatoes. And I just love doing it. It's a lot of work. Is it for everybody? Absolutely not. But it's something that brings me joy. I do enjoy spending large amounts of time in the kitchen, and it's very, very satisfying to see the fruits of your labor in your pantry and to be able to enjoy it all fall, winter, and hopefully into next summer. So these top ones I can tell are done. So I do need to keep a close eye on the things that I have in the oven because I don't want to burn them. So I'm just going to take these out. These ones are not quite done yet. I'm just going to pop these ones on the top shelf. And I'm going to show you how easy, after roasting the tomatoes, how easy it is to take the skins off. So they just peel right off. So I'm going to save these skins and actually freeze dry them and turn them into powder. And tomato powder is delicious. I made it for the first time last year. These are very hot. As long as they don't get too darkened, I can still do that. And the tomato powder was fantastic. How I use the tomato powder is if I was making like a white sauce and Alfredo sauce and I wanted to kind of make a pink sauce, I would just throw some tomato powder in it, and it was so good. It would give you that pink sauce flavor without adding any extra moisture, like if you were to add a jar of tomato sauce. And so I only made a little bit of it. I went through it within probably a month after making it, so I want to try to make a little bit more of that this year. So if you do this with your hands right after they come out of the oven, just be careful because These tomatoes are very, very hot. And I need another bowl. I'm gonna have to go find another bowl to put these tomatoes in because I need to caramelize my onions in my big pot before I can start adding my tomatoes to my pot. I think I heard these tomatoes. I think these are done. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and take these out because I don't want them to get too cooked on here. For some reason, these ones weren't very moist compared to those ones. Now, for years, I would can tomatoes from tomatoes that I would buy from a local farmer. So if this is something you want to do, but you don't happen to have your own garden, you still absolutely can put up tomatoes for your family if you'd like. Now, a couple ways you can find local farmers in your area if you're not sure where to start is there is a search engine called localharvest.org. I can link it down below, where it's a nonprofit website that basically you put your zip code in and it helps you find local farms in your area. You can also Google U-Picks. We have a couple U-Picks in our area. And you can also go to your local farmer's market and talk to your local farmers. Now, typically when you go to the farmer's market, the tomatoes that the farmer is selling at the farmer's market are their most pristine and beautiful tomatoes. But what I would encourage you to do is if you want to buy tomatoes in a higher quantity, is ask farmers that are growing tomatoes, hey, do you happen to have a bulk price that I could buy from you? Or do you have what are called second tomatoes? A lot of farmers will sell what are called seconds, so they're not their most beautiful, pristine tomato. They're still perfectly good to eat, but they might, have a blemish on them, or they might be cracked or just damaged in some way that they don't want to sell at market. But if you're going to can them, it doesn't really matter what they look like. And so I have done that a lot where I have just gone to my local farmer's market, built relationships with farmers, and asked if they have bulk quantities of tomatoes I can buy. So those are a few ways that if you don't have your own garden, but you want to put up tomatoes, you might be able to find someone in your area that's growing them. Let me reread my recipe. I have to figure out if I'm supposed to de-seed them before I roast them or after I roast them, because I think it said to run it through the food mill. So we're just gonna check here real quick what it says. Cut tomatoes into halves or quarters as necessary to create a uniform size. Arrange tomatoes in a single layer on a large rimmed baking sheet. Bake. So we're not supposed to remove the tomatoes or the seeds. I'm not sure why I thought I needed to do that. I did that last year for something. Maybe it was for the tomato soup that I made, because I made a roasted tomato soup and I'm getting the two recipes confused. So once you roast them, press tomatoes in batches through a food mill in a large bowl. Discard skins and seeds. Okay. Okay, so that must be the roasted tomato soup I'm getting confused with. So that's gonna save me a lot of time not having to go through, and that one has a bad spot on it, I just noticed. Having to remove the seeds because we'll run everything through a food mill when it's done. I used to can all my tomatoes as just plain crushed tomatoes, and I didn't turn them into anything until I opened the jar. And that has changed over the years. Now I like to take the time up front, like we're doing today, turn them into a product that when I pop the jar open, I'm really excited to eat it, and it becomes kind of a convenience item for me on my pantry shelf. So that is why I'm putting in the work now to save me time later. All three of my ovens have tomatoes in them. These are washed tomatoes. So what I think I'm gonna do now is actually get my stovetop working for me. There are still more tomatoes that need to be washed, but it's gonna take quite some time for my onions to caramelize. So I want my onions caramelizing while, I'm looking for my compost bowl, while my tomatoes are roasting. And I'll just have to work in batches in the ovens to get all of these tomatoes roasted up. So I have, and I need to get garlic too, a big box of onions here. And I need to figure out how many onions chopped we need. So for every recipe, we need 1.5 cups of onions. So I have 4 1/4 recipes. So that is going to be 6 cups plus 1/2 cup. So 6.5 cups of onions, right? 1.5 times 4 1/4. I'm gonna go do some math. I'm gonna use a calculator real quick to make sure I have that right, because this is something I want to make sure that I have my ratio of onions to tomatoes correctly. All right, the internet says it is 6.37 cups. So I have these homegrown onions here, and I did go through and I picked my little onions that I grew, and I left my big onions downstairs to cure. My little tiny onions, I have plans for them. I have friends coming over and I'm gonna make them a dinner, and I want to use the teeny tiny onions for that dinner, but kind of just, I'm throwing them now. These like medium to, small onions. I figured since I'm gonna go through the effort of chopping them right now, I'm gonna get these tiny little onions chopped and out of the way so I don't have to worry about them later. So when it comes to cooking with them throughout the fall and winter, I will much more enjoy grabbing a medium-sized onion. So these onions do have a little bit of dirt on them. So what I'm gonna do is just cut the tops and bottoms off, remove the skins, and then I'll go wash the onion, and then we'll come back and dice them up. I'll wash my cutting board too, so my cutting board will be nice and clean as well. It is like musical chairs when it is tomato processing day, between washing tomatoes, roasting tomatoes, chopping onions. These are done. So I'm gonna go ahead and set these over here. I don't want them too charred, so we're gonna put those there. So I'm running out of cookie sheets. So let's see what these look like here. So I can't put these tomatoes in my big pot yet because I haven't made my caramelized onions. And I have some tomatoes now in, that's not gonna fit, some other pans. So we're gonna go through a lot of pans. So this recipe is not the most quick and fast and easy recipe. It definitely is a little bit more tedious and labor intensive than just making a sauce that's not roasted. But I think it's delicious, and so I think I am going through the effort of roasting it. So I do know that I'm gonna have a lot of dishes to do at the end of this, and that's okay. The reason I wanna get these onions caramelizing is so that as the tomatoes come out of the oven, I can throw them in this pot, and then I can use a few less dishes because I can just keep using the same cookie sheets. But I also wanna keep the tomatoes roasting in the oven. So it's kind of this balancing act. So I have 2 cups of onions here. I just put a little bit of oil in the bottom of this pan. Actually, after I caramelize these onions, I'm only running the tomatoes through the food mill. I'm not running my onions through the food mill. So I just need to find another big bowl to put the tomatoes in as they come out of the oven. Let me get the rest of my onions in here so I don't mess up on how many onions I need in this pot. I am chopping these onions really small because I am not putting them through the food mill, so I don't want big chunks of onion in my final sauce. Might be the rest of the onions we need. Nope, need to chop a couple more. And I haven't checked my tomatoes in this oven in a while because I know that they take about 5 or 6 times as long to roast than my Roman potatoes do. I haven't even washed all the tomatoes. I'm just looking around and being like, oh my goodness, okay. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but I think it's worth it. Okay, so there is 2 more cups, so we're at now 4 cups. So I think I'm gonna give those ones just a minute longer. And even though I'm gonna run these through the food mill, I do wanna collect some of these skins because I wanna freeze dry them. And I think that little bit of roasty toasty on these skins is just gonna add lots of flavor. So it's gonna be like a roasted tomato powder, and that's gonna be delicious. And let me tell you, it is a lot easier removing these skins once these tomatoes have cooled a little bit. Oh, it smells so good in here. I do want to make sure my ovens are working for me. So even though I really want to clean up my onion mess, I'm going to make sure that I get more tomatoes in the oven roasting. And then when I have all 3 ovens working, I have my now onions caramelizing, I then will clean up my onion mess and kind of focus on actually cleaning up some of the mess on my counters. And if I see any tomatoes that have a bad spot, if it's not worth saving the tomato, that tomato gets chucked to the chickens. If I can just cut it off and use the rest of the tomato, then I'm doing that. Another tray going in. So now that I have all of my ovens working for me, I am going to go ahead and kind of clean up and reset so that I don't feel so overwhelmed with all of these tomatoes. So I'm going to kind of condense these. I think I can go ahead and just take, no, those are still a little warm, so I'm going to let those sit for a few more minutes. Let me show you what I'm working with here. So first off, this cookie sheet burnt, and I don't want this to happen again because I think this cookie sheet is no good anymore. So I'm going to unfortunately have to get rid of this cookie sheet. And then these onions I don't need for any other projects today, so I'm going to go ahead and bring these back downstairs. This I didn't use, so I can actually put this away. I'm keeping a close eye on these onions because I don't want them to burn. These onions can go over here. I peeled a few extra onions than I need, so I think what I'm going to go ahead and do is just chop these up. And I will use these in my cooking at some point this week. I'll just pop these in the fridge, and I won't have to think about chopping onions for this week, which is always nice. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and sweep my floors because I do have some onion bits all over the floor, and I kind of want to get those picked up. All right, I have the kitchen reset. I swept my floor so there's not onion pieces that I'm walking on. I now can wash tomatoes again. These are the only tomatoes I still need to wash. My caramelized onions are cooking down. And if I don't get every little bit of skin, that's okay, because again, I'm gonna be pulling out my food mill. I'm gonna be running all of these through the food mill. So whatever I don't get will just come off in the food mill.
Now, when I first started canning, I mentioned earlier that I started with just crushed tomatoes, and that's because I needed an easy barrier to entry to putting up tomatoes for my family. And now that I've got many, many years under my belt of canning tomatoes, I found this recipe last year, and it was so good that I had to ration using it, which that's what I want. When I'm going to go through the effort of putting something up for my family, I want it to be so good that I have to like ration myself from using it. And I didn't do a ton of it last year, and so I'm willing to put in the effort to take an entire day. This takes us an entire day almost to do this. By the time we started this project to where I empty my canners for the final time, it takes all day to do this. And so I'm willing to put that effort in. And I know that this is not for everybody. This is my hobby. I enjoy spending time in the kitchen. I enjoy seeing my pantry shelf full of beautiful jars of tomatoes. And so, you know, I'm willing to put the work in. But when I first started canning, I would not have touched this recipe with a 10-foot pole. I just did crushed tomatoes and called it good. But now I'm willing to put a little bit more effort in to make a convenience item for me. So this year I don't need to make any tomato sauce, or not tomato sauce. I'm not going to do any crushed plain tomatoes. I do have some left over from last year because I did do some crushed tomatoes last year. I like having crushed tomatoes on my pantry shelf as well for things like chilies or something where I don't want it to be a marinara sauce. I want it to be just plain tomatoes. And so I am really focusing on this recipe just because I have zero of it, and I know that we are not going to need a pantry challenge to use it up.
So Josh just came in here and he offered to help. He's got about an hour, maybe an hour and a half to help, and that's awesome. So Josh, would you be willing to actually wash the tomatoes for me? I've kind of got a good system of me slicing the tomatoes. So the only tomatoes that still need to be washed are these ones right here. Okay. And I've got a colander there, and what I'm gonna do is get you a bowl. So what I've been doing is washing each individual tomato, and then I put them in the colander, and then I kind of rinse all of them again. And then I stick them in one of these bowls that is considered a clean tomato bowl. That one needs to be washed again. Okay. And then I expect each tomato as I'm slicing them, so I'm just gonna pour this in here. It's okay if there's a little bit of water in the bottom of the bowl because we're gonna be roasting them and cooking them down.
Cool.
Thank you. That's gonna help this process along quite well. Josh, would you also actually be willing, before you do that, to grab out my tomato food mill and maybe get that set up? Because I feel like you'd probably be able to get that set up pretty quicker than I can.
Sure.
Okay. Do you know where it is?
What is that?
Oh, he asked what it is because he has never used it before. So it is that electric mill that we run the tomatoes through and the applesauce through. It's in that closet in the garage that it's in a box. So it's gonna say food mill on the box. And part of the pieces are in this drawer that you'll need.
Okay.
I actually, if you need me to set it up, I can set it up, that's totally fine.
I can do that. I just need to know what it was.
Awesome. I'm just putting more tomatoes on this cookie sheet or baking pan.
You said there were parts of it?
Yeah, so the parts, the screws, Josh is setting up my food mill over here. There's a little wrench in that top drawer and two little, I think they're called bolts. You could correct me with what, yep. So this was a big investment,
I must say, these are nuts.
Oh, nuts, not
because
bolts.
I say that all the time too, incorrectly.
Thank you. So I can link the one I have down below. Just know it is a big investment. It does save a ton of time and you get a better product out of it. Now you can get a manual crank one as well. They do have those on that you can use as well. I just do so many tomatoes at one time and I use that for applesauce as well. I really enjoyed having that electric piece of equipment. Okay, so now I'm over here. Thanks for getting that set up, Josh. I want to go ahead and get that oven working for me. So I kind of have cutting boards on both ends of my island, just so that if I'm over here, I can work over here.
There's gotta be another piece somewhere. Is there something that goes around this?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, so this is exposed. Okay.
This is a little splash guard.
Gotcha.
The manual should be in there.
It's tattered.
Okay, I'm gonna get all of these sliced and all the rest of my tomatoes washed here. So Josh got it set up. I do need to remember to put a thing here. I forget to put something here all the time. We turned it on, tested it. So now, would you be willing to work on washing these?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you.
So you tell me what you would have done. Would you have washed all the tomatoes and then cut all the cores off, sliced them all, and then roasted them all at the same time? Like done 1, 2, 3 steps instead of like what I did on this day, where I was going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. That was my original plan. My original plan was to do all the washing, all the cutting, and then all the roasting. But the idea of having my oven sit there without tomatoes in it while I was washing other tomatoes just didn't sit right with me. And so I kind of was going from thing to thing to thing to thing so that I could try to keep my ovens working for me. Typically, I love when my appliances can work for me. Like a lot of times I'll turn my washing machine on, I will turn my dishwasher on, and then I'll go about cleaning other things so that at least my appliances are doing their jobs while I am doing things that my appliances can't do. So anyway, that was my thinking. What would you have done in this situation? And this tomato corer, amazing. I didn't use it for the Roma tomatoes because they were a little small, but for the heirlooms, absolutely a dream. Josh is washing tomatoes for me. My onions are nice and cooked and caramelized. And what I think I'm gonna do while he's washing tomatoes, I'm gonna start processing some of these tomatoes through the mill. On the same vein as what I was just talking about, I'm skipping around. So there are still tomatoes that need to be washed. Josh is taking care of those for me. There's still tomatoes that need to be sliced, but I have my ovens going for me, and my bowl that I was putting my roasted tomatoes in was getting kind of full. So I figured I better run those tomatoes through the food mill so that I can keep putting my roasted tomatoes into this big bowl. So I do have the tomatoes straining into a bowl, and I have that bowl sitting on a table. The table is the one that I had the tomatoes sitting on from the very beginning, so it's going full circle. Now that my tomatoes are strained through the strainer, I'm going to go ahead and add a few more of the ingredients we need to our marinara sauce. This recipe does call for a red wine, and I'm just giving it a little bit of a taste test to make sure that it's good. I'm having Josh taste it because we're going to be cooking this red wine down. I want to make sure it tastes good before we reduce it and concentrate its flavor. So I'm going to get that in there, and then there are some other seasonings and spices and salt and pepper that need to go in, and I need actually a little bit more than this one bottle, so I end up putting in this entire bottle, and then I do need to open one more bottle of wine to get that in there. And I think this is why this sauce is so good, is because I love cooking with wine. This is some garlic that I just chopped up myself, and I froze in these little pucks so that it would be easier to use when I need to use it. All right, are you done washing them?
Yep.
Would you be willing to slice the tomatoes in half and line them on those cookie sheets or baking sheets that are already out of the oven, and they can go on the top shelf? Yeah. So all you need to do is cut the tops off, cut them in half, and then lay them cut side down.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all garbage. You can throw that away. So I added the remaining wine here, and I let this reduce down quite a bit. Josh said it smells like garlic bread in here because of all that garlic. And I want to go ahead and get some tomatoes in there to start reducing that I've already run through the mill because that bowl is only so big. So I'm going to have to do this in batches, and I probably shouldn't carry a bowl that's any bigger than this in here. So I'm going to go ahead and carefully get that in here. Now I'm going to keep running tomatoes through the mill. At this point, it feels like we are cooking with fire because with two people helping on a project, it doesn't feel like it goes twice as fast. It feels exponential. Anytime I have either help in the garden or cooking, it always surprises me how much quicker things go. And so by having Josh's help, we just can start running through these tomatoes really, really quickly. So I am going to run the tomatoes that we already have roasted through the food mill. These are right here that I'm putting to the food mill. These are the skins and pulp that have already gone through once, or skins and seeds, I should say. There's still quite a bit of pulp in those skins and seeds, so I'm going to run it through one more time. And this bowl that you're going to see me put into the stock pot, this is all tomato pulp that we wouldn't have gotten if I hadn't have run it through a second time. I think this is one of the things that the electric mill does so well, is just extracting every little bit of pulp from the tomatoes as possible. And it's a lot quicker. The only downside to the electric mill is that it's kind of loud, but because it goes so quickly, it doesn't bother me that it's kind of loud. This is the third summer of me using it, and I absolutely love it. I have a manual crank one, which is what I used for many, many years, but
I don't use it anymore because I have the electric one, and I think it's probably time I go ahead and donate it. I just thought about that right now. So I'm probably going to end up donating my manual one. I only pull this out when I do big projects, but this is how I like to do projects, is I would rather do big projects, pull all the equipment out, and then get to put it away.
All the tomatoes now for the marinara sauce are prepped. Now they're not all roasted. I have this oven going, those two ovens going, but they've all been sliced, and we are starting to reduce down what we've already done here. So Josh, would you be willing to start washing all of these cherry tomatoes so we can start on our sun-dried tomato project next? Okay, so these ones, the tops just need to be removed and they just need to be washed. And we are going to do probably half of these in the sun-dried tomatoes, and then the other half can you put in vacuum seal bags and freeze so we can make that baked pasta we like.
Yeah.
Okay, and I want to keep those separate from these ones.
These are Roma tomatoes. They just are really small, so I figured these would be a great way to use these up. So Crystal says these are the type of tomatoes that do the best for this, but it will be kind of fun to do a side-by-side comparison between these mini Roma tomatoes and some cherry tomatoes that I have. These still need to be washed.
I have seen all different ways to make sun-dried tomatoes online. Some of them say you can pack them in oil and put them in the fridge. Some say you shouldn't do that. So we're gonna try this year Crystal's method of the freezing method. We use a lot of sun-dried tomatoes as a pizza topping, as a focaccia topping, as an additive in pasta salads and in pasta dishes. And I do buy sun-dried tomatoes all the time. I have never made them. I have dehydrated tomatoes, but if you dehydrate them in your dehydrator, they're crispy and crunchy, and they're not the texture of a sun-dried tomato that you buy at the store. They don't act the same as the ones you buy in the store, so I stopped making them because I didn't really enjoy them. So I think we're gonna like the texture of these oven sun-dried tomatoes better, because we're only gonna dry them about 75% dry, and then we're gonna freeze them. I'll show you what they're gonna look like as we get to that process. But now I am just waiting for tomatoes to roast so that I can get them in this pot.
Again, it is musical chairs. I stopped slicing the tomatoes because I had 2 of these pans that were empty, and so I could load these back up and throw these in the oven and get roasting for me. These are the last of the tomatoes that need to go into the oven, and I am running my food mill and getting those tomatoes in the pot. Oh, these are the last of the tomatoes. I did end up removing the piece of parchment paper I originally had on here, and I'm just putting a fresh one on here because I really don't want to ruin this baking sheet. I really like this baking sheet, and I've already ruined one of them on accident today by letting the tomatoes get a little too brown on the bottom of this roaster. So we're gonna get these loaded up, get these in the oven, and then we officially have all of the tomatoes in the oven roasting, and this is a huge accomplishment that we've reached this point in the day.
We are going to fill these jars today. That is on the list of things to do. So now we've got our last Roma tomatoes in the oven. This pot is about right here. I'm totally fine with this just cooking and reducing while the rest of these tomatoes cook. The recipe says cook it until your desired thickness. It says 15 minutes. It's gonna take much longer than 15 minutes for me to get this to my desired thickness, because I want this to be ready to go, store-bought thickness tomato sauce. Okay, so I have all my cherry tomatoes sliced that I'm gonna end up turning into oven roasted cherry tomatoes. The rest of these I need to finish washing, and I'm gonna freeze these ones. So let me just keep on keeping on. So here's an honest look at what this kitchen looks like. This counter is a disaster, but that's totally fine. I don't want to wipe anything down until I'm done with processing these tomatoes. I am going to take these tomatoes out of the oven, and I don't think the last 1, 2, 3, 4 trays. Not gonna worry about saving the skins because I have a huge bowl here, and I'm gonna have more tomatoes to process that I can save skins from if I don't think I have quite enough tomato skins. So we're gonna get this in here. Oop, spilled a couple, that's okay. So I'm gonna get a new piece of parchment paper on here. I'm actually gonna wash this off. I'm gonna wash the edges off so that it doesn't continue to bake on there. So something I try to do when I do new projects when it comes to putting up things is the first time I do it, I don't do a huge batch because I'm not sure if I'm gonna like it. I've definitely made that mistake before where I go all in on a project and then I come to find out we don't love it. So my new kind of way I think about these types of projects is to just start small. If I love it, next time I do it, I will make more. And that's kind of one reason why we ran out of this marinara sauce last year, because I started small and we loved it, and so we used it really quickly. So here we have, this is clean, I know it doesn't look clean, but I'm gonna get a piece of parchment paper on here. And all I'm gonna do this a little different because the idea with these sun-dried tomatoes is actually to not roast them. We wanna kind of dry them out. So we're gonna put them cut side up this time, and we do not need to de-seed them. Just gonna get them all on here. You're here to help, Josh?
Yeah, what would you like me to do?
These are clean. Can you package these up? Probably about half of these in one package, the other half in another package, and vacuum seal these and freeze these. And then these ones still need to be washed, and the stems need to be taken off, and so 4 packages total. Does that make sense? So this is gonna fill 2 packages.
4 packages of the same thing.
Yes.
And 4 packs that are gonna be vacuum sealed and frozen.
Perfect,
Okay.
yes. He's gonna do 4 packs for me. That can go to the chickens. If there's one that's split open that looks questionable, go ahead and just,
There's a couple other.
yeah, go ahead and just give those to the chickens.
They're just gonna squish out.
So I've kind of laid these out flat. I'm gonna try to stick them kind of close together. I don't think they need to be far apart because I want to try to get this all done on one tray if at all possible. I don't know, I might not be able to get them all to fit on here, but we're certainly gonna try. So Josh got the vacuum sealer out. Josh, would you be willing to, when you walk back over here, grab me this salt container? Thank you. So I think I want to season these with salt. I can do whatever I want to these tomatoes because I'm not canning them. I am gonna freeze them. So if I want to add a little bit of salt, I certainly can do that. I think we can get all these to fit on here. Where there's a will, there's a way. All right, so now I've got some salt here. Just a light sprinkling. These are gonna take a good 45 minutes to an hour or so. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these not on the top shelf again because I'm not looking to roast them. I'm looking to kind of dehydrate them. I think these tomatoes are done down here. We're gonna call them done. It has been about 2 hours and you can see how much this has cooked down. It was about right here and it's reduced down by a good 2.5 inches or so. And this is a nice thick consistency sauce now. I did add the remaining salt that the recipe called for because I tasted it and I felt like it needed it, so I added it. I want it to be an open, convenient item that I can just open or I want it to be a shelf-stable, convenient item I have on my pantry shelf. And so I want it to be seasoned how I want it to taste. So what I'm gonna do now is I need to get some water in my canner. Now this is my pressure canner. I'm not pressure canning this sauce. I am water bath canning this sauce, but I'm gonna use my pressure canner to water bath can because I usually water bath can in this, and obviously this is full of sauce. So I'm gonna start heating up some sauce here. I'm gonna start heating up some water here. And I'm actually gonna turn this off and I'm gonna let this cool down just a little bit. I want my sauce that's in my jars about the same temperature as the water. And I don't really want either one of them boiling. So we're gonna let this kind of cool down just a bit. I'm gonna go ahead and fill my jars on this counter just because it's easier. And in the 2 hours that this has been simmering away, the dishwasher was able to be ran and unloaded, and we were able to get all of the dishes that we used today put away. We got the food mill scrubbed and put away, and all the big dishes. We were able to go get the chickens, all the chicken scraps, and it's just been a very productive day. I'm not cooking dinner tonight. I did a bunch of cooking earlier this week, and so we've got lots of options for dinner. So thankfully, the kitchen, after we get all this canning done, is gonna be closed for the day. So I'm gonna get this water on the stove, and it's already pretty warm, but it's not gonna be as warm as this sauce. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start filling jars. I need a ladle. I do have a ladle with a little lip on it. I'm just not sure where it is at the moment. It's a really nice ladle because when you're done using it, you just kind of hook it on the side. Yeah, this is a nice thickness. 1/2 inch headspace. And then these are gonna process for my elevation for 40 minutes. So this is gonna be a late night for me because I'm gonna be able to fill a lot of jars. So I will share with you how much we ended up getting out of 4 1/4 batches, which was 85 pounds of tomatoes. And we still have a lot of other tomato projects we're gonna be doing this year. Oh, let me show you, well, let me get these filled. I'm going to wipe the rims, debubble, put a new lid, put a ring on, and get these in the water bath canner, have it come up to a boil. Once it's boiling, I will set the timer for 40 minutes. I will turn the stove off. I will let it sit for 5 minutes, and then I will empty the canner, and I will add more jars to the canner. But I want to show you what those tomatoes look like that I have in the oven. So I showed you what they looked like last time, and then I just turned my oven off and I put them back in there, and I'm letting them just kind of air dry in the oven, in the hot oven, but without any extra heat. I think what I want to try doing with some of the tomatoes that comes out of the garden is putting them in my dehydrator, but instead of dehydrating them until they're completely crispy and crunchy, I will dehydrate them until they are 75% done, and then instead of putting them on the pantry shelf because they wouldn't be pantry stable at that point, I will throw them in the freezer instead of doing them in the oven. I want to try that and see how well that does as opposed to doing it in the oven. I am going to can some of these in pints as well. I want to have good options. It's 5:37 right now. We started this at like 10, and I would not even be this far along if it wasn't for the help. So this is definitely a labor of love, but it is something that I love to do, and I am grateful you were here along for the ride. And it's not even over yet. I will show you what time I get completely done with this, but the hard part is over. The kitchen is clean. Everything is made. We just need to now send it through the water bath canner, and so that it is shelf stable. So I've been talking a little bit about how there are some things that I'm not canning anymore and I'm freezing, and I prefer to freeze them over can them. Tomato sauce is one of the things that I think is better canned and on the pantry shelf for a couple of reasons. One, it doesn't affect the flavor at all to put it through the canner. Sometimes things can change the flavor because you're cooking them even longer when you run something through the canner. But the biggest benefit of it is that I think it makes it taste better, and it's thawed and ready to go when you want to use it. You don't have to thaw it first. Another reason why I love canned broth, because it is so convenient to have homemade broth on your pantry shelf. I froze it for years and I was scared to learn to can it, but when I started buying meat from local farmers, I needed that space in my freezer for meat, not for broth. And so I learned to can it, and I think it is fantastic. So again, if you're interested in learning how to can, I will link my canners down below, and I will link my favorite canning books and a free resource, the National Home Food Preservation website. I know I'm not saying that correctly, but I will link that down below. And there's a lot of free resources with that. When you actually buy a pressure canner, you get a manual that has amazing resources in it that come free with your canners. And I refer to that all the time, but I will also link my 2 favorite canning cookbooks down there as well. So thank you for being here. I will show you what it all looks like when said and done and what time I get done. But I am going to go put my feet up and relax. I just need to listen for this to boil. Once it's boiling, I'll set my timer and it is on its way. So if you've been here before, thank you for taking time yet again out of your day to spend time with me. If you're new, welcome. Thank you for joining me along this long marathon of a canning day. I greatly appreciate every single one of you. If you want to watch more of my videos, I'll pop some here. You can go enjoy between now and my next upload. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye, friend.